Welcome back for another terrifying and strange story. And if you're new here, welcome to Whispers of Weird, where we tell some of the world's most strange, mysterious, and downright terrifying stories. Let's dive into it, shall we? In today's story, we're going to be having a look at a man who shocked an entire country with his crimes. In the quiet suburbs of London, an unassuming man named Denis Nilsen lived a seemingly ordinary life. But behind the closed doors of his flat, Nilsen was hiding a horrific secret. A secret that would shock the world and forever etch his name in the dark history of serial killers. Over a span of 5 years, Nilsen killed at least 12 young men, luring them into his home before carrying out unspeakable acts. This is the chilling story of Denis Nilsen, the man who turned his home into a house of horrors. Born on November 23, 1945 in Fraserburgh, Scotland, Denis Nilsen had a troubled childhood. His parents' unhappy marriage ended in divorce when he was still young, and he grew up feeling isolated. His grandfather, who he deeply admired, passed away when Nilsen was just 6. This event had a profound impact on him. Nilsen would later claim that his grandfather's death triggered his fascination with death and the human body. As he grew older, Nilsen joined the British Army as a cook, serving from 1961 to 1972. It was during his time in the army that Nilsen became more aware of his homosexual desires, though he kept these feelings largely hidden. After his military service, he moved to London, working as a police officer and later as a civil servant. In the late 1970s, Nilsen began frequenting bars and clubs where he would meet young men, many of them homeless or vulnerable. His first known victim was 14-year-old Stephen Holmes, who Nilsen met in December 1978. Holmes followed Nilsen back to his flat after a night of drinking. The next morning, Nilsen strangled him to death. This was the beginning of Nilsen's killing spree, which would continue for 5 years. Nilsen lured his victims back to his home where he would strangle them, often using a necktie. Afterward, he would bathe and dress the bodies, keeping them for days, even weeks, before eventually dismembering them. Nilsen later described his murders as acts of kindness, and claimed he couldn't bear to let his victims go. Nilsen's murders followed a grim and methodical routine. His victims, most of whom were young men, were usually picked up in pubs or on the streets. After luring them to his home, Nilsen would offer food or alcohol. Once his victims were incapacitated or asleep, he would strangle them to death. But it wasn't just the act of killing that interested him. What truly sets Nilsen apart from other serial killers was his necrophiliac tendencies. He would keep the bodies for days, sometimes sitting them in his living room as if they were still alive, watching TV alongside him. He even slept next to the corpses. When the bodies began to decay, he would dismember them and attempt to dispose of the remains. At his first flat, Nilsen buried parts of the bodies in his garden, but when he moved to an apartment without a garden, he resorted to boiling the remains and flushing smaller parts down the toilet. It was this careless method of disposal that would ultimately lead to his downfall. In February 1983, Nilsen's crimes came to light in the most unexpected way. The drains at his Muswell Hill flat were blocked, and a plumber was called to investigate. What he found was horrifying: human flesh and bones clogging the pipes. The police were notified, and when they questioned Nilsen, he immediately confessed, casually admitting to killing at least 15 men. During his trial later that year, Nilsen showed little remorse. He calmly recounted the details of his murders in shocking detail, stating that he killed because he was lonely. He was convicted of 6 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder, receiving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Nilsen's case remains one of the most disturbing in British criminal history. Psychologists have tried to understand what drove him to commit such heinous acts. Some believe his crimes were rooted in his unresolved feelings of isolation, abandonment, and repressed sexual desires. Others point to his obsession with control and his fear of being alone. Nilsen himself offered little explanation. He described his killings as something he felt compelled to do, a compulsion he couldn't explain. Even in prison, where he died in 2018, Nilsen remained a mysterious and chilling figure, never fully revealing the true nature of his monstrous actions. Denis Nilsen's name has become synonymous with horror, not just for the lives he took, but for the cold, calculated way in which he went about his crimes. His story is a haunting reminder of the darkness that can hide behind even the most ordinary of facades. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. We'll see you next time.